Side 3. Ubik by Philip K. Dick. Continuing on page 90. "You know who I feel like talking to," Joe said as the moratorium owner scuttled off in search of pen and paper. "Wendy Wright. She'll know what to do. I value her opinion. Why is that, I wonder? I barely know her." He noticed then that subtle background music hung over the lounge. It had been there all this time, the same as on the chopper. Dies irae, dies illa, the voices sang darkly, solvet cyclum in favilla, teste David cum Sibylla. The Verdi Requiem, he realized. Von Vogelsang, probably personally with his own two hands, switched it on at 9 a.m. every morning when he arrived for work. "Once you get your hotel room, Al said, I could probably talk Wendy Wright into showing up there." "That would be immoral," Joe said. "What?" Al stared at him. "At a time like this, when the whole organization is about to sink into oblivion unless you can pull yourself together? Anything that'll make you function is desirable, in fact necessary. Go back to the phone, call a hotel, come back here and tell me the name of the hotel and all our money is worthless," Joe said. "I can't operate the phone, not unless I can find a coin collector who'll trade me another Swiss 10-franc piece of current issue." "Jeez," Al said. He let out his breath in a groaning sigh and shook his head. "Is it my fault?" Joe said. "Did I make that quarter you gave me obsolete?" He felt anger. "In some weird way," Al said, "yes, it is your fault. But I don't know how. Maybe one day I'll figure it out. Okay, we'll both go back to Pratfall, too. You can pick Wendy right up there and take her to the hotel with you." "Quantus tremor est futurus," the voices sang. "Quando judex est venturus, cuncta stricte discussurus." "What'll I pay the hotel with? They won't take our money any more than the phone will." Cursing, Al yanked out his wallet, examined the bills in it. "These are old, but still in circulation." He inspected the coins in his pockets. "These aren't in circulation." He tossed the coins to the carpet of the lounge, ridding himself, as the phone had, in disgust. "Take these bills." He handed the paper currency to Joe. "There's enough there for the hotel room for one night, dinner, and a couple of drinks for each of you. I'll send a ship from New York tomorrow to pick you and her up." "I'll pay you back," Joe said. "As pro tem director of Runsider Associates, I'll draw a higher salary. I'll be able to pay all my debts off, including the back taxes, penalties, and fines which the income tax people—" "Without Pat Conley, without her help?" "I can throw her out now," Joe said. Al said, "I wonder. This is a new start for me, a new lease on life. I can run the firm," he said to himself. "Certainly I won't make the mistake that Runsider made. Hollis, posing as Stanton Nick, won't lure me and my inertials off Earth where we can be gotten at." "In my opinion," Al said hollowly, "you have a will to fail. No combination of circumstances, including this, is going to change that." "What I actually have," Joe said, "is a will to succeed. Glenn Runsider saw that, which is why he specified in his will that I take over in the event of his death and the failure of the beloved Brethren Moratorium to revive him into half-life, or any other reputable moratorium as specified by me." Within him, his confidence rose. He saw now the manifold possibilities ahead, as clearly as if he had precog abilities, and then he remembered Pat's talent, what she could do to precogs, to any attempt to foresee the future. "Tuba mirum spargem sonum," the voices sang, "per sepulchra regionem cogit omnes ante pronem." Reading his expression, Al said, "You're not going to throw her out, not with what she can do." "I'll rent a room at the Zurich Roots Hotel," Joe decided, "as per your outlined proposal." But, he thought, Al's right, it won't work. Pat, or even something worse, will move in and destroy me. I'm doomed in the classic sense. An image thrust itself into his agitated, fatigued mind, a bird caught in cobwebs. Age hung about the image, and this frightened him. This aspect of it seemed literal and real, and, he thought, prophetic. But he could not make out exactly how. The coins, he thought. out of circulation, rejected by the phone, collector's items, like ones found in museums. Is that it? Hard to say. He really didn't know. Mors stupebit, the voices sang, et natura, cum resurget creatura, judicanti responsura. They sang on and on. Chapter 8. If money worries have you in the cellar, go visit the lady at Ubik Savings and Loan. She'll take the frets out of your debts. Suppose, for example, you borrow 59 postcreds on an interest-only loan. Let's see, that adds up to... Daylight rattled through the elegant hotel room, uncovering stately shapes which, Joe Chip blinkingly saw, were articles of furnishings. Great hand-printed drapes of a neo-silkscreen sort that depicted man's ascent from the unicellular organisms of the Cambrian period to the first heavier-than-air flight at the beginning of the 20th century. A magnificent pseudo-mahogany dresser, 4 variegated crypto-chrome-plated reclining chairs. He groggily admired the splendor of the hotel room, and then he realized with a tremor of keen disappointment that Wendy had not come knocking at the door. Or else he had not heard her. He had been sleeping too deeply. Thus, the new empire of his hegemony had vanished in the moment it had begun. With numbing gloom, a remnant of yesterday, pervading him, he lurched from the big bed, found his clothes, and dressed. It was cold, unusually so. He noticed that and pondered on it. Then he lifted the phone receiver and dialed for room service. Pay him back, if at all possible, the receiver declared in his ear. First, of course, it has to be established whether Stanton Nick actually involved himself, or if a mere homo simulacric substitute was in action against us, and if so, why? And if not, then how? The voice droned on, speaking to itself and not to Joe. It seemed as unaware of him as if he did not exist. From all our previous reports, the voice declared, it would appear that Mick acts generally in a reputable manner and in accord with legal and ethical practices established throughout the system. In view of this, Joe hung up the phone and stood dizzily swaying, trying to clear his head. Runsider's voice, beyond any doubt. He again picked up the phone, listened once more. Lawsuit by Mick, who can afford and is accustomed to litigation of that nature. Our own legal staff certainly should be consulted before we make a formal report to the society. It would be libel, if made public, and grounds for a suit claiming false arrest if... Runsider, Joe said. He said it loudly. Unable to verify, probably, for at least... Joe hung up. I don't understand this, he said to himself. Going into the bathroom, he splashed icy water on his face, combed his hair with a sanitary, free hotel comb, then, after meditating for a time, shaved with a sanitary, free hotel throwaway razor. He slapped sanitary, free hotel aftershave onto his chin, neck, and jowls, unwrapped the sanitary, free hotel glass, and drank from it. Did the moratorium finally manage to revive him, he wondered, and wired him up to my phone? Runsider, as soon as he came around, would want to talk to me, probably before anyone else. But if so, why can't he hear me back? Why does it consist of one-way transmission only? Is it only a technical defect, which will clear up? Returning to the phone, he picked up the receiver once more, with the idea of calling the beloved Brethren moratorium. Not the ideal person to manage the firm in view of his confused personal difficulties, particularly... I can't call, Joe realized. He hung up the receiver. I can't even get room service. In a corner of the large room, a chime sounded, and a tinkling mechanical voice called, I'm your free homeopathic machine, a service supplied exclusively by all the fine roots hotels throughout Earth and the colonies. Simply dial the classification of news that you wish, and in a matter of seconds I'll speedily provide you with a fresh, up-to-the-minute homeopathy tailored to your individual requirements, and, let me repeat, at no cost to you. "Okay," Joe said, and crossed the room to the machine. Maybe by now, he reflected, news of Runsider's murder has gotten out. The news media cover all admissions to moratoriums routinely. He pressed the button marked High-Type Interplan Info. At once the machine began to clank out a printed sheet, which he gathered up as fast as it emerged. No mention of Runsider. Too soon? Or had the society managed to suppress it? Or Al, he thought. Maybe Al slipped a few postcreds to the owner of the moratorium. But he himself had all of Al's money. Al couldn't buy off anybody to do anything. A knock sounded on the hotel room door. Putting down a homeopate, Joe made his way cautiously to the door, thinking, "It's probably Pat Conley. She's trapped me here. On the other hand, it might be someone from New York, here to pick me up and take me back there." Theoretically, he conjectured, it could even be Wendy, but that did not seem likely. Not now, not this late. It could also be an assassin dispatched by Hollis. He could be killing us off one by one. Joe opened the door. Quivering with unease, wringing his pulpy hands together, Herbert Schoenheit von Vogelsang stood in the doorway, mumbling, "I just don't understand it, Mr. Chip. We worked all night in relays. We just are not getting a single spark. And yet we ran an electroencephalograph, and the gram shows faint but unmistakable cerebral activity. So the afterlife is there, but we still can't seem to tap it. We've got probes at every part of the cortex now. I don't know what else we can do, sir." "Is there measurable brain metabolism?" Joe asked. "Yes, sir. We called in an outside expert from another moratorium, and he detected it, using his own equipment. It's a normal amount, too, just what you'd expect immediately after death." "How did you know where to find me?" Joe asked. "We called Mr. Hammond in New York. Then I tried to call you here at your hotel, but your phone has been busy all morning. That's why I found it necessary to come here in person." "It's broken," Joe said. "The phone. I can't call out either." The moratorium owner said, "Mr. Hammond tried to contact you, too, with no success. He asked me to give you a message from him, something he wants you to do here in Zurich before you start back to New York." "He wants to remind me," Joe said, "to consult Ella. To tell her about her husband's unfortunate, untimely death." "Can I borrow a couple of postcards from you," Joe said, "so I can eat breakfast?" "Mr. Hammond warned me that you would try to borrow money from me. He informed me that he already provided you with sufficient funds to pay for your hotel room, plus a round of drinks, as well as—" Al based his estimate on the assumption that I would rent a more modest room than this. However, nothing smaller than this was available, which Al did not foresee. "You can add it onto the statement which you will be presenting to Runsider Associates at the end of the month. I am, as Al probably told you, now acting director of the firm. You're dealing with a positive-thinking, powerful man here who has worked his way step by step to the top. I could, as you must well realize, reconsider our basic policy decision as to which moratorium we wish to patronize. We might, for example, prefer one nearer New York." Grumpily, von Vogelsang reached within his tweed toga and brought out an ersatz alligator-skin wallet, which he dug into. "It's a harsh world we're living in," Joe said, accepting the money. "The rule is dog eat dog." "Mr. Hammond gave me further information to pass on to you. The ship from your New York office will arrive in Zurich 2 hours from now, approximately." "Fine," Joe said. "In order for you to have ample time to confer with Ella Runsider, Mr. Hammond will have the ship pick you up at the moratorium. In view of this, Mr. Hammond suggests that I take you back to the moratorium with me. My chopper is parked on the hotel roof." "Al Hammond said that? That I should return to the moratorium with you?" "That's right," von Vogelsang nodded. "A tall, stoop-shouldered Negro, about 30 years old, with gold-capped front teeth, each with an ornamental design, the one on the left a heart, the next a club, the one on the right a diamond." "The man who came with us from Zurich Field yesterday, who waited with you at the moratorium." Joe said, "Did he have on green felt knickers, gray golf socks, badger hide, open midriff blouse, and imitation patent leather pumps?" I couldn't see what he wore. I just saw his face on the vid screen. Did he convey any specific code word so I could be sure it was him? The moratorium owner, peeved, said, I don't understand the problem, Mr. Chip. The man who talked to me on the vid phone from New York is the same man you had with you yesterday. I can't take a chance, Joe said, on going with you, on getting into your chopper. Maybe Ray Hollis sent you. It was Ray Hollis who killed Mr. Runsider. His eyes, like glass buttons, von Vogelsang said, Did you inform the Prudent Society of this? We will. We'll get around to it in due time. Meanwhile, we have to watch out that Hollis doesn't get the rest of us. He intended to kill us, too, there on Luna. You need protection, the moratorium owner said. I suggest you go immediately to your phone and call the Zurich police. They'll assign a man to cover you until you leave for New York. And as soon as you arrive in New York, my phone, as I said, is broken. All I get on it is the voice of Glenn Runsider. That's why no one could reach me. Really? How very unusual. The moratorium owner undulated past him into the hotel room. May I listen? He picked up the phone receiver questioningly. One postcred, Joe said. Digging into the pockets of his tweed toga, the moratorium owner fished out a handful of coins. His airplane propeller beanie whirred irritably as he handed 3 of the coins to Joe. I'm only charging you what they ask around here for a cup of coffee, Joe said. This ought to be worth at least that much. Thinking that, he realized that he had had no breakfast and that he would be facing Ella in that condition. Well, he could take an amphetamine instead. The hotel probably provided them free as a courtesy. Holding the phone receiver tightly against his ear, von Vogelsang said, I don't hear anything, not even a dial tone. Now I hear a little static, as if from a great distance, very faint. He held the receiver out to Joe, took it, and also listened. He, too, heard only the far-off static. From thousands of miles away, he thought, eerie, as perplexing in its own way as the voice of Runsider, if that was what it had been. I'll return your postcard, he said, hanging up the receiver. Never mind, von Vogelsang said. But you didn't get to hear his voice. Let's return to the moratorium, as your Mr. Hammond requested, Joe said. Al Hammond is my employee. I make policy. I think I'll return to New York before I talk to Ella. In my opinion, it's more important to frame our formal notification to the society. When you talked to Al Hammond, did he say whether all the inertials left Zurich with him? All but the girl who spent the night with you here in the hotel. Puzzled, the moratorium owner looked around the room, obviously wondering where she was. His peculiar face fused over with concern. Isn't she here? Which girl was it? Joe asked. His morale, already low, plunged into the blackest depths of his mind. Mr. Hammond didn't say. He assumed you'd know. It would have been indiscreet for him to tell me her name, considering the circumstances. Didn't she? Nobody showed up. Which had it been? Pat Conley? Or Wendy? He prowled about the hotel room, reflexively working off his fear. I hope to God he thought that it was Pat. In the closet, von Vogelsang said. What? He stopped pacing. Maybe you ought to look in there. These more expensive suites have extra-large closets. Joe touched the stud of the closet door. Its spring-loaded mechanism sent it flying open. On the floor of the closet, a huddled heap, dehydrated, almost mummified, lay curled up. Decaying shreds of what seemingly had once been cloth covered most of it, as if it had, by degrees, over a long period of time, retracted into what remained of its garments. Bending, he turned it over. It weighed only a few pounds. At the push of his hand, its limbs folded out into thin, bony extensions that rustled like paper. Its hair seemed enormously long, wiry and tangled. The black cloud of hair obscured its face. He crouched, not moving, not wanting to see who it was. In a strangled voice, von Vogelsang rasped, That's old, completely dried out, like it's been here for centuries. I'll go downstairs and tell the manager. It can't be an adult woman, Joe said. These could only be the remnants of a child. They were just too small. It can't be either Pat or Wendy, he said. and lifted the cloudy hair away from its face. "It's like it was in a chill," he said, "at a very high temperature for a long time. The blast," he thought, "the severe heat from the bomb." He stared silently then at the shriveled, heat-darkened little face, and knew who this was. With difficulty he recognized her. Wendy Wright. Sometime during the night, he reasoned, she had come into the room, and then some process had started in her or around her. She had sensed it and had crept off, hiding herself in the closet so he wouldn't know. In her last few hours of life, or perhaps minutes, he hoped it was only minutes, this had overtaken her, but she had made no sound. She hadn't wakened him. Or, he thought, she tried and she couldn't do it, couldn't attract my attention. Maybe it was after that, after trying and failing to wake me, that she crawled into this closet. I pray to God, he thought, that it happened fast. "You can't do anything for her?" he asked von Vogelsang, "at your moratorium?" "Not this late. There wouldn't be any residual half-life left, not with this complete deterioration. Is she the girl?" "Yes," he said, nodding. "You better leave this hotel, right now, for your own safety. Hollis, it is Hollis, isn't it, will do this to you, too." "My cigarettes," Joe said, dried out. "The 2-year-old phone book in the ship. The soured cream and coffee with scum on it, mold on it. The antiquated money. A common thread. Age. She said that back on Luna, after we made it up to the ship. She said, 'I feel old.'" He pondered, trying to control his fear. It had begun now to turn into terror. But the voice on the phone, he thought, Runsider's voice, what did that mean? He saw no underlying pattern, no meaning. Runsider's voice on the vidphone fitted no theory which he could summon up or imagine. "Radiation," von Vogelsang said. "It would seem to me that she was exposed to extensive radioactivity, probably some time ago. An enormous amount of it, in fact." Joe said, "I think she died because of the blast. The explosion that killed Runsider. Cobalt particles," he said to himself. "Hot dust that settled on her and which she inhaled. But then, we're all going to die this way. It must have settled on all of us. I have it in my own lungs. So does Al. So do the other inertials. There's nothing that can be done in that case. It's too late. We didn't think of that," he realized. "It didn't occur to us that the explosion consisted of a micronic nuclear reaction. No wonder Hollis allowed us to leave. And yet—" That explained Wendy's death, and it explained the dried-out cigarettes, but not the phone book, not the coins, not the corruption of the cream and coffee. Nor did it explain Runsider's voice, the yammering monologue on the hotel room's vidphone, which ceased when von Vogelsang lifted the receiver. When someone else tried to hear it, he realized. "I've got to get back to New York," he said to himself. "All of us who were there on Luna, all of us who were present when the bomb blast went off, we have to work this out together. In fact, it's probably the only way it can be worked out, before the rest of us die one by one, the way Wendy did, or in a worse way, if that's possible." "Have the hotel management send a polyethylene bag up here," he said to the moratorium owner. "I'll put her in it and take her with me to New York." "Isn't this a matter for the police? A horrible murder like this? They should be informed." Joe said, "Just get me the bag." "All right, it's your employee." The moratorium owner started off down the hall. "Was once," Joe said. "Not anymore." It would have to be her first, he said to himself. But maybe in a sense that's better. "Wendy," he thought, "I'm taking you with me, taking you home." But not as he had planned. To the other inertials seated around the massive genuine oak conference table, Al Hammond said, breaking abruptly into the joint silence, "Joe should be back any time now." He looked at his wristwatch to make certain. It appeared to have stopped. "Meanwhile," Pat Conley said, "I suggest we watch the late afternoon news on TV to see if Hollis has leaked out the news of Runsider's death." "It wasn't in the paper today," Edie Dorn said. "The TV news is much more recent," Pat said. She handed Al a 50-cent piece with which to start up the TV set, mounted behind curtains at the far end of the conference room, an impressive 3D color polyphonic mechanism which had been a source of pride to Runsider. Want me to put it in the slot for you, Mr. Hammond? Sammy Mundo asked eagerly. Okay, Al said. Broodingly, he tossed the coin to Mundo, who caught it and trotted toward the set. Restlessly, Walter W. Wales, Runsider's attorney, shifted about in his chair, fiddled with his fine-veined aristocratic hands at the clasp lock of his briefcase, and said, "You people should not have left Mr. Chip in Zurich. We can do nothing until he arrives here, and it's extremely vital that all matters pertaining to Mr. Runsider's will be expedited." "You've read the will," Al said, "and so has Joe Chip. We know who Runsider wanted to take over management of the firm." "But from a legal standpoint," Wales began. "It won't take much longer," Al said brusquely. With his pen, he scratched random lines along the borders of the list he had made. Preoccupied, he embroidered the list, then read it once again. Stale cigarettes, out-of-date phone book, obsolete money, putrefied food, ad on match folder. "I'm going to pass this list around the table once more," he said aloud, "and see if this time anyone can spot a connective link between these 5 occurrences, or whatever you want to call them. These 5 things that are," he gestured. "Are wrong," John Ild said. Pat Conley said, "It's easy to see the connective between the first 4, but not the match folder. That doesn't fit in." "Let me see the match folder again," Al said, reaching out his hand. Pat gave him the match folder, and once again he read the ad. "Amazing opportunity for advancement to all who can qualify. Mr. Glenn Runsider of the Beloved Brethren Moratorium of Zurich, Switzerland, doubled his income within a week of receiving our free shoe kit, with detailed information as to how you also can sell our authentic, simulated leather loafers to friends, relatives, business associates. Mr. Runsider, although helplessly frozen in cold pack, earned 400... Al stopped reading. He pondered meanwhile, picking at a lower tooth with his thumbnail. Yes, he thought, this is different, this ad. The others consist of obsolescence and decay, but not this. "I wonder," he said aloud, "what would happen if we answered this match folder ad? It gives a box number in Des Moines, Iowa." "We'd get a free shoe kit," Pat Conley said, "with detailed information as to how we too can—" "Maybe," Al interrupted, "we find ourselves in contact with Glenn Runsider." Everyone at the table, including Walter W. Wales, stared at him. "I mean it," he said. "Here." He handed the match folder to Tippy Jackson. "Write them stamped mail." "And say what?" Tippy Jackson asked. "Just fill out the coupon," Al said. To Edie Dorn he said, "Are you absolutely sure you've had that match folder in your purse since late last week? Or could you have picked it up somewhere today?" Edie Dorn said, "I put several match folders into my purse on Wednesday. As I told you, this morning on my way here, I happened to notice this one as I was lighting a cigarette. It definitely has been in my purse from before we went to Luna, from several days before." "With that ad on it?" John Ild asked her. "I never noticed what the match folder said before. I only noticed this today. I can't say anything about it before. Who can?" "Nobody can," Don Denny said. "What do you think, Al? A gag by Runsider? Did he have them printed up before his death? Or Hollis, maybe? As a sort of grotesque joke, knowing that he was going to kill Runsider? That by the time we noticed the match folder, Runsider would be in Coldpack, in Zurich, like the match folder says?" Tito Apostos said, "How would Hollis know we'd take Runsider to Zurich and not to New York?" "Because Ella's there," Don Denny answered. At the TV set, Sammy Mundo stood silently inspecting the 50-cent piece which Al had given him. His underdeveloped pale forehead had wrinkled up into a perplexed frown. "What's the matter, Sam?" Al said. He felt himself tense up inwardly. He foresaw another happening. "Isn't Walt Disney's head supposed to be on the 50-cent piece?" Sammy said. "Either Disney's," Al said, "or if it's an older one, then Fidel Castro's. Let's see it." "Another obsolete coin," Pat Conley said as Sammy carried the 50-cent piece to Al. "No," Al said, examining the coin. "It's last year's. Perfectly good date-wise. Perfectly acceptable. Any machine in the world would take it. The TV set would take it." "Then what's the matter?" Edie Dorn asked timidly. "Exactly what Sam said," Al answered. "It has the wrong head on it." He got up, carried the coin over to Edie, deposited it in her moist open hand. Who does it look like to you? After a pause, Edie said, I don't know. Sure you know, Al said. Okay, Edie said sharply, goaded into replying against her will. She pushed the coin back at him, ridding herself of it with a shiver of aversion. It's rum cider, Al said to all of them seated around the big table. After a pause, Tippy Jackson said, Add that to your list. Her voice was barely audible. I see two processes at work, Pat said presently, as Al reseated himself and began to make the addendum on his piece of paper. One, a process of deterioration. That seems obvious. We agree on that. Raising his head, Al said to her, What's the other? I'm not quite sure, Pat hesitated. Something to do with rum cider. I think we should look at all our other coins, and paper money too. Let me think a little longer. One by one, the people at the table got out their wallets, purses, rummaged in their pockets. I have a 5 postcred note, John Hill said, with a beautiful steel engraving portrait of Mr. Runsider. The rest? He took a long look at what he held. They're normal. They're okay. Do you want to see the 5 postcred note, Mr. Hammond? Al said, I've got 2 of them already. Who else? He looked around the table. 6 hands had gone up. 8 of us, he said, have what I guess we should call Runsider money now, to some extent. Probably by the end of the day all the money will be Runsider money, or give it 2 days. Anyhow, Runsider money will work. It'll start machines and appliances, and we can pay our debts with it. Maybe not, Don Denny said. Why do you think so? This, what you call Runsider money, he tapped the bill he held. Is there any reason why the banks should honor it? It's not legitimate issue. The government didn't put it out. It's funny money. It's not real. Okay, Al said reasonably. Maybe it's not real. Maybe the banks will refuse it. But that's not the real question. The real question, Pat Conley said, is, what does this second process consist of, these manifestations of Runsider? That's what they are, Don Denny nodded. Manifestations of Runsider. That's the second process, along with the decay. Some coins get obsolete. Others show up with Runsider's portrait or bust on them. You know what I think? I think these processes are going in opposite directions. One is a going away, so to speak, a going out of existence. That's process 1. The second process is a coming into existence, but of something that never existed before. Wish fulfillment, Edie Dorn said faintly. Pardon? Al said. Maybe these are things Runsider wished for, Edie said. To have his portrait on legal tender, on all our money, including metal coins. It's grandiose. Tito Apostol said, But match folders? I guess not, Edie agreed. That's not very grandiose. The firm already advertises on match folders, Don Denny said, and on TV, and in the papes and mags, and with junk mail. Our PR department handles all that. Generally, Runsider didn't give a damn about that end of the business, and he certainly didn't give a damn about match folders. If this were some sort of materialization of his psyche, you'd expect his face to appear on TV, not on money or match folders. Maybe it is on TV, Al said. That's right, Pat Conley said. We haven't tried it. None of us have had time to watch TV. Sammy, Al said, handing him back the 50-cent piece, go turn the TV set on. I don't know if I want to look, Edie said, as Sammy Mundo dropped the coin into the slot and stood off to one side, jiggling the tuning knobs. The door of the room opened. Joe Chip stood there, and Al saw his face. Shut the TV set off, Al said, and got to his feet. Everyone in the room watched as he walked toward Joe. What happened, Joe? He said. He waited. Joe said nothing. What's the matter? I chartered a ship to bring me back here, Joe said huskily. You and Wendy? Joe said, write out a check for the ship. It's on the roof. I don't have enough money for it. To Walter W. Wales, Al said, are you able to disburse funds? For something like that, I can. I'll go settle with the ship. Taking his briefcase with him, Wales left the room. Joe remained in the doorway, again silent. He looked 100 years older than when Al had last seen him. In my office, Joe turned away from the table. He blinked, hesitated. I don't think you should see. The man from the moratorium was with me when I found her. He said he couldn't do anything. It had been too long. Years. Years? Al said, chilled. Joe said, "We'll go down to my office." He led Al out of the conference room into the hall to the elevator. "On the trip back here, the ship fed me tranquilizers. That's part of the bill. Actually, I feel a lot better. In a sense, I don't feel anything. It must be the tranquilizers. I guess when they wear off, I'll feel it again." The elevator came. Together they descended, neither of them saying anything until they reached the third floor, where Joe had his office. "I don't advise you to look." Joe unlocked his office, led Al inside. "It's up to you. If I got over it, you probably will." He switched on the overhead lighting. After a pause, Al said, "Lord God." "Don't open it," Joe said. "I'm not going to open it." "This morning or last night?" Evidently it happened early, before she even reached my room. That moratorium owner and I, found bits of cloth in the corridor leading to my door, but she must have been all right, or nearly all right, when she crossed the lobby. Anyhow, nobody noticed anything, and in a big hotel like that, they keep somebody watching, and the fact that she managed to reach my room, yeah, that indicates she must have been at least able to walk. That seems probable, anyhow. Joe said, "I'm thinking about the rest of us." "In what way?" "The same thing happening to us." "How could it? How could it happen to her?" "Because of the blast. We're going to die like that one after another, one by one, until none of us are left. Until each of us is 10 pounds of skin and hair in a plastic bag, with a few dried-up bones thrown in." "All right," Al said. "There's some force at work, producing rapid decay. It's been at work since, or started with, the blast there on Luna. We already knew that. We also know, or think we know, that another force, a contra-force, is at work, moving things in an opposite direction. Something connected with Runsider. Our money is beginning to have his picture on it. A match folder. He was on my vid phone," Joe said, "at the hotel." "On it? How?" "I don't know. He just was. Not on the screen, not the video part, only his voice." "What did he say?" "Nothing in particular." Al studied him. "Could he hear you?" he asked finally. "No. I tried to get through. It was one way entirely. I was listening in, and that was all." "So that's why I couldn't get through to you." "That's why," Joe nodded. "We were trying the TV when you showed up. You realize there's nothing in the papers about his death." "What a mess." He did not like the way Joe Chip looked. Old, small, and tired, he reflected. Is this how it begins? "We've got to establish contact with Runsider," he said to himself. "Being able to hear him isn't enough. Evidently he's trying to reach us, but if we're going to live through this, we'll have to reach him." Joe said, "Picking him up on TV isn't going to do us any good. It'll just be like the phone all over again, unless he can tell us how to communicate back. Maybe he can tell us. Maybe he knows. Maybe he understands what's happened." "He would have to understand what's happened to himself, which is something we don't know." In some sense, Al thought, he must be alive, even though the moratorium failed to rouse him. Obviously, the moratorium owner did his best with a client of this much importance. "Did von Vogelsang hear him on the phone?" he asked Joe. He tried to hear him, but all he got was silence and then static, apparently from a long way off. I heard it too. Nothing. The sound of absolute nothing. A very strange sound. "I don't like that," Al said. He was not sure why. "I'd feel better about it if von Vogelsang had heard it too. At least that way we could be sure it was there, that it wasn't an hallucination on your part. Or for that matter, he thought, on all our parts, as in the case of the match folder. But some of the happenings had definitely not been hallucinations. Machines had rejected antiquated coins, objective machines geared to react only to physical properties. No psychological elements came into play there. Machines could not imagine. "I'm leaving this building for a while," Al said. "Think of a city or a town at random, one that none of us have anything to do with, one where none of us ever go or have ever gone." "Baltimore," Joe said. "Okay, I'm going to Baltimore. I'm going to see if a store picked at random will accept Runsider currency." "Buy me some new cigarettes," Joe said. "Okay, I'll do that too. I'll see if cigarettes in a random store in Baltimore have been affected. I'll check other products as well. I'll make random samplings. Do you want to come with me, or do you want to go upstairs and tell him about Wendy? Joe said, I'll go with you. Maybe we should never tell him about her. I think we should, Joe said. Since it's going to happen again, it may happen before we get back. It may be happening now. Then we'd better get our trip to Baltimore over as quickly as possible, Al said. He started out of the office. Joe Chip followed. Chapter 9. My hair is so dry, so unmanageable. What's a girl to do? Simply rub in creamy Ubik hair conditioner. In just 5 days you'll discover new body in your hair, new glossiness. And Ubik hairspray, used as directed, is absolutely safe. They selected the Lucky People supermarket on the periphery of Baltimore. At the counter, Al said to the autonomic, computerized checker, Give me a pack of Pall Malls. Wings are cheaper, Joe said. Irritated, Al said. They don't make wings anymore. They haven't for years. They make them, Joe said, but they don't advertise. It's an honest cigarette that claims nothing. To the checker, he said, Change that from Pall Malls to Wings. The pack of cigarettes slid from the chute and onto the counter. 95 cents, the checker said. Here's a 10-postcred bill. Al fed the bill to the checker, whose circuits at once whirred as it scrutinized the bill. Your change, sir, the checker said. It deposited a neat heap of coins and bills before Al. Please move along now. So Runsider money is acceptable, Al said to himself as he and Joe got out of the way of the next customer, a heavy-set old lady wearing a blueberry-colored cloth coat and carrying a Mexican rope shopping bag. Cautiously, he opened the pack of cigarettes. The cigarettes crumbled between his fingers. It would have proved something, Al said, if this had been a pack of Pall Malls. I'm getting back in line. He started to do so, and then discovered that the heavy-set old lady in the dark coat was arguing violently with the autonomic checker. It was dead, she asserted shrilly, by the time I got it home. Here, you can have it back. She set a pot on the counter. It contained, Al saw, a lifeless plant, perhaps an azalea. In its moribund state, it showed few features. I can't give you a refund, the checker answered. No warranty goes with a plant like which we sell. Buyer beware is our rule. Please move along now. And the Saturday Evening Post, the old lady said, that I picked up from your newsstand. It was over a year old. What's the matter with you? And the Martian Grubworm TV dinner. Next customer, the checker said. It ignored her. Al got out of line. He roamed about the premises until he came to the cartons of cigarettes. Every conceivable brand, stacked to heights of 8 feet or more. Pick a carton, he said to Joe. Dominoes, Joe said. They're the same price as Wings. Christ, don't pick an off-brand. Pick something like Winston's or Cool's. He himself yanked out a carton. It's empty. He shook it. I can tell by the weight. Something, however, inside the carton bounced about, something weightless and small. He tore the carton open and looked within it. A scrawled note, in handwriting familiar to him, and to Joe. He lifted it out, and together they both read it. Essential, I get in touch with you. Situation serious, and certainly will get more so as time goes on. There are several possible explanations, which I'll discuss with you. Anyhow, don't give up. I'm sorry about Wendy Wright. In that connection, we did all we could. Al said, So he knows about Wendy. Well, maybe that means it won't happen again to the rest of us. A random carton of cigarettes, Joe said, at a random store in a city picked at random, and we find a note directed at us from Glenn Runsider. What do the other cartons have in them? The same note? He lifted down a carton of L&M's, shook it, then opened it. 10 packs of cigarettes plus 10 more below them. Absolutely normal. Or is it? Al asked himself. He lifted out one of the packs. You can see they're okay, Joe said. He pulled out a carton from the middle of the stacks. This one is full, too. He did not open it. Instead, he reached for another, and then another. All had packs of cigarettes in them, and all crumbled into fragments between Al's fingers. I wonder how he knew we'd come here, Al said, and how he knew we'd try that one particular carton. It made no sense. And yet, here, too, the pair of opposing forces were at work. Decay versus Runsider, Al said to himself, throughout the world, perhaps throughout the universe. Maybe the sun will go out, Al conjectured, and Glenn Runsider will place a substitute sun in its place, if he can. Yes, he thought, that's the question. How much can Runsider do? Put another way, how far can the process of decay go? Let's try something else, Al said. He walked along the aisle, past cans, packages, and boxes, coming at last to the appliance center of the store. There, on impulse, he picked up an expensive German-made tape recorder. This looks all right, he said to Joe, who had followed him. He picked up a second one, still in its container. Let's buy this and take it back to New York with us. Don't you want to open it, Joe said, and try it out before you buy it? I think I already know what we'll find, Al said, and it's something we can't test out here. He carried the tape recorder toward the check stand. Back in New York at Runsider Associates, they turned the tape recorder over to the firm's shop. 15 minutes later, the shop foreman, having taken apart the mechanism, made his report. All the moving parts in the tape transport stage are worn. The rubber drive tire has flat spots on it. Pieces of rubber are all over the inside. The brakes for high-speed wind and rewind are virtually gone. It needs cleaning and lubricating throughout. It's seen plenty of use. In fact, I would say it needs a complete overhaul, including new belts. Al said, several years of use? Possibly. How long you had it? I bought it today, Al said. That isn't possible, the shop foreman said. Or if you did, they sold you. I know what they sold me, Al said. I knew when I got it before I opened the carton. To Joe, he said, a brand-new tape recorder, completely worn out, bought with funny money that the store is willing to accept. Worthless money, worthless article purchased. It has a sort of logic to it. This is not my day, the shop foreman said. This morning when I got up, my parrot was dead. Dead of what, Joe asked. I don't know, just dead. Stiff as a board. The shop foreman waggled a bony finger at Al. I'll tell you something you don't know about your tape recorder. It isn't just worn out, it's 40 years obsolete. They don't use rubber drive tires anymore, or belt-run transports. You'll never get parts for it unless somebody hand makes them, and it wouldn't be worth it. The damn thing is antiquated. Junk, you forget about it. You're right, Al said. I didn't know. He accompanied Joe out of the shop and into the corridor. Now we're talking about something other than decay. This is a different matter, and we're going to have trouble finding edible food anywhere of any kind. How much of the food sold in supermarkets would be good after that many years? The canned goods, Joe said, and I saw a lot of canned goods at that supermarket in Baltimore. And now we know why, Al said. 40 years ago, supermarkets sold a far greater proportion of their commodities in cans rather than frozen. That may turn out to be our sole source, you're right, he cogitated. But in one day it's jumped from 2 years to 40 years. By this time tomorrow it may be 100 years, and no food is edible 100 years after it's packaged, cans or otherwise. Chinese eggs, Joe said. 1,000-year-old eggs that they bury in the ground. And it's not just us, Al said. That old woman in Baltimore, it's affecting what she bought too, her azalea. Is the whole world going to starve because of a bomb blast on Luna, he asked himself. Why is everyone involved, instead of just us? Joe said. Here comes... Be quiet a second, Al said. I have to think something out. Maybe Baltimore is only there when one of us goes there, and the Lucky People supermarket. As soon as we left, it passed out of existence. It could still be that only we who were on Luna are really experiencing this. A philosophical problem of no importance or meaning, Joe said, and incapable of being proved one way or the other. Al said caustically. It would be important to that old lady in the blueberry-colored cloth coat, and to all the rest of them. Here's the shop foreman, Joe said. I've just been looking at the instruction manual, the shop foreman said, that came with your tape recorder. He held a booklet out to Al, a complicated expression on his face. Take a look. All at once he grabbed it back. I'll save you the trouble of reading. Look here on the last page where it tells who made the damn thing and where to send it for factory repairs. Made by Runsider of Zurich, Al read aloud. "And a maintenance station in the North American Confederation in Des Moines, the same as on the match folder." He passed the booklet to Joe and said, "We're going to Des Moines. This booklet is the first manifestation that links the two locations." "I wonder why Des Moines," he said to himself. "Can you recall," he said to Joe, "any connection that Runsider ever had during his lifetime with Des Moines?" Joe said, "Runsider was born there. He spent his first 15 years there. Every once in a while he used to mention it. So now, after his death, he's gone back there, in some manner or other. Runsider is in Zurich," he thought, "and also in Des Moines. In Zurich he has measurable brain metabolism. His physical half-life body is suspended in cold pack in the beloved Brethren Moratorium, and yet he can't be reached. In Des Moines he has no physical existence, and yet, evidently, there contact can be established. In fact, by such extensions as this instruction booklet has been established, at least in one direction, from him to us. And meanwhile," he thought, "our world declines, turns back onto itself, bringing to the surface past phases of reality. By the end of the week we may wake up and find ancient clanging streetcars moving down Fifth Avenue. Trolley dodgers," he thought, and wondered what that meant. An abandoned verbal term rising from the past, a hazy, distant emanation in his mind, canceling out current reality. Even this indistinct perception, still only subjective, made him uneasy. It had already become too real, an entity which he had never known about before this moment. "Trolley dodgers," he said aloud. 100 years ago at least. Obsessively the term remained lodged within awareness. He could not forget it. "How come you know that?" the shop foreman asked. "Nobody knows that anymore. That's the old name for the Brooklyn Dodgers." He eyed Al suspiciously. Joe said, "We better go upstairs and make sure they're all right before we take off for Des Moines." "If we don't get to Des Moines soon," Al said, "it may turn out to be an all-day trip or even a 2-day trip." As methods of transportation devolve, he thought, from rocket propulsion to jet, from jet to piston-driven aircraft, then surface travel as the coal-fed steam train, horse-drawn cart. But it couldn't regress that far, he said to himself, and yet we've already got on our hands a 40-year-old tape recorder run by rubber drive tire and belts. Maybe it could really be. He and Joe walked rapidly to the elevator. Joe pressed the button and they waited, both of them on edge, saying nothing. Both withdrew into their own thoughts. The elevator arrived clatteringly. The racket awoke Al from his introspection. Reflexively he pushed aside the iron grill safety door and found himself facing an open cage with polished brass fittings, suspended from a cable. A dull-eyed, uniformed operator sat on a stool, working the handle. He gazed at them with indifference. It was not indifference, however, that Al felt. "Don't get in," he said to Joe, holding him back. "Look at it and think. Try to remember the elevator we rode in earlier today, the hydraulic-powered, closed, self-operated, absolutely silent." He ceased talking, because the elderly clanking contraption had dimmed, and in its place the familiar elevator resumed its existence. And yet he sensed the presence of the other, older elevator. It lurked at the periphery of his vision, as if ready to ebb forward as soon as he and Joe turned their attention away. It wants to come back, he realized. It intends to come back. We can delay it temporarily, a few hours probably at the most. The momentum of the retrograde force is increasing. Archaic forms are moving toward domination more rapidly than we thought. It's now a question of 100 years at one swing. The elevator we just now saw must have been a century old. And yet, he thought, we seem able to exert some control over it. We did force the actual contemporary elevator back into being. If all of us stay together, if we function as an entity of not 2, but 12 minds... "What did you see," Joe was saying to him, "that made you tell me not to get in the elevator?" Al said, "Didn't you see the old elevator? Open cage, brass, from around 1910, with the operator sitting on his stool?" "No," Joe said. "Did you see anything?" "This," Joe gestured, "the normal elevator I see every day when I come to work. I saw what I always see, what I see now." He entered the elevator, turned, and stood facing Al. Then our perceptions are beginning to differ, Al realized. He wondered what that meant. It seemed ominous. He did not like it at all. In its dire, obscure way, it seemed to him potentially the most deadly change since Runsider's death. They were no longer regressing at the same rate, and he had an acute, intuitive intimation that Wendy Wright had experienced exactly this before her death. He wondered how much time he himself had left. Now he became aware of an insidious, seeping, cooling off, which at some earlier and unremembered time had begun to explore him, investigating him as well as the world around him. It reminded him of their final minutes on Luna. The chill debased the surfaces of objects. It warped, expanded, showed itself as bulb-like swellings that sighed audibly and popped. Into the manifold open wounds the cold drifted, all the way down into the heart of things, the core which made them live. What he saw now seemed to be a desert of ice from which stark boulders jutted. A wind spewed across the plain, which reality had become. The wind congealed into deeper ice, and the boulders disappeared for the most part, and darkness presented itself off at the edges of his vision. He caught only a meager glimpse of it, but, he thought, this is projection on my part. It isn't the universe which is being entombed by layers of wind, cold, darkness, and ice. All this is going on within me, and yet I seem to see it outside. Strange, he thought. Is the whole world inside me, engulfed by my body? When did that happen? It must be a manifestation of dying, he said to himself. The uncertainty which I feel is slowing down into entropy. That's the process. And the ice which I see is the result of the success of the process. When I blink out, he thought, the whole universe will disappear. But what about the various lights which I should see, the entrances to new wombs? Where in particular is the red smoky light of fornicating couples, and the dull dark light signifying animal greed? All I can make out, he thought, is encroaching darkness and utter loss of heat, a plain which is cooling off, abandoned by its sun. This can't be normal death, he said to himself. This is unnatural. The regular momentum of dissolution has been replaced by another factor imposed upon it, a pressure arbitrary and forced. Maybe I can understand it, he thought, if I can just lie down and rest, if I can get enough energy to think. What's the matter, Joe asked, as together they ascended in the elevator. Nothing, Al said curtly. They may make it, he thought, but I'm not going to. He and Joe continued on up in empty silence. As he entered the conference room, Joe realized that Al was no longer with him. Turning, he looked back down the corridor. He made out Al standing alone, not coming any farther. What's the matter? He asked again. Al did not move. Are you all right? Joe asked, walking back toward him. I feel tired, Al said. You don't look good, Joe said, feeling deeply uneasy. Al said, I'm going to the men's room. You go ahead and join the others. Make sure they're okay. I'll be along pretty soon. He started vaguely away. He seemed now confused. I'll be okay, he said. He moved along the corridor haltingly, as if having difficulty seeing his way. I'll go with you, Joe said, to make sure you get there. Maybe if I splash some warm water on my face, Al said. He found the toll-free door to the men's room, and with Joe's help opened it and disappeared inside. Joe remained in the corridor. Something's the matter with him, he said to himself. Seeing the old elevator made a change in him. He wondered why. Al reappeared. What is it? Joe said, seeing the expression on his face. Take a look at this, Al said. He led Joe into the men's room and pointed at the far wall. Graffiti, he said. You know, words scrawled, like you find all the time in the men's room. Read it. In crayon, or purple ballpoint pen ink. The words read, Jump in the urinal and stand on your head. I'm the one that's alive. You're all dead. Is it Runsider's writing? Al asked. Do you recognize it? Yes, Joe said, nodding. It's Runsider's writing. So now we know the truth, Al said. Is it the truth? Al said. Sure, obviously. What a hell of a way to learn it from the wall of a men's room. He felt bitter resentment rather than anything else. That's how graffiti is, harsh and direct. We might have watched the TV and listened to the vidphone and read the papes for months, forever maybe, without finding out. without being told straight to the point like this. Joe said, "But we're not dead, except for Wendy. We're in half-life, probably still on pratfall, too. We're probably on our way back to Earth from Luna after the explosion that killed us, not Runsider, and he's trying to pick up the flow of protophasons from us. So far he's failed. We're not getting across from our world to his. But he's managed to reach us. We're picking him up everywhere, even places we choose at random. His presence is invading us on every side, him and only him, because he's the sole person trying to—" "He and only he," Joe interrupted, instead of him. "You said him." "I'm sick," Al said. He started water running in the basin, began splashing it onto his face. It was not hot water, however, Joe saw. In the water, fragments of ice crackled and splintered. "You go back to the conference room. I'll be along when I feel better, assuming I ever do feel better." "I think I ought to stay here with you," Joe said. "No, goddammit, get out of here!" His face gray and filled with panic. Al shoved him toward the door of the men's room. He propelled Joe out into the corridor. "Go on. Make sure they're all right." Al retreated back into the men's room, clutching at his own eyes. Bent over, he disappeared from view as the door swung shut. Joe hesitated. "Okay," he said. "I'll be in the conference room with him." He waited, listening, heard nothing. "Al?" he said. "Christ," he thought, "this is terrible. Something is really the matter with him." "I want to see with my own eyes," he said, pushing against the door, "that you're all right." In a low, calm voice, Al said, "It's too late, Joe. Don't look." The men's room had become dark. Al evidently had managed to turn the light off. "You can't do anything to help me," he said in a weak but steady voice. "We shouldn't have separated from the others. That's why it happened to Wendy. You can stay alive at least for a while if you go find them and stick with them. Tell them that. Make sure all of them understand. Do you understand?" Joe reached for the light switch. A blow, feeble and weightless, cuffed his hand in the darkness. Terrified, he withdrew his hand, shocked by the impotence of Al's punch. It told him everything. He no longer needed to see. "I'll go join the others," he said. "Yes, I understand. Does it feel very bad?" Silence. And then a listless voice whispered, "No, it doesn't feel very bad. I just—" The voice faded out. Once more only silence. "Maybe I'll see you again sometime," Joe said. He knew it was the wrong thing to say. It horrified him to hear himself prattle out such an inanity. But it was the best he could do. "Let me put it another way," he said, but he knew Al could no longer hear him. "I hope you feel better," he said. "I'll check back after I tell them about the writing on the wall in there. I'll tell them not to come in here and look at it because it might—" He tried to think it out, to say it right. "They might bother you," he finished. No response. "Well, so long," Joe said, and left the darkness of the men's room. He walked unsteadily down the corridor back to the conference room. Halting a moment, he took a deep, irregular breath and then pushed open the conference room door. The TV set, mounted in the far wall, blared out a detergent commercial. On the great color 3D screen, a housewife critically examined a synthetic otter pelt towel, and in a penetrating, shrill voice declared it unfit to occupy a place in her bathroom. The screen then displayed her bathroom and picked up graffiti on her bathroom wall, too. The same familiar scroll, this time reading, "Lean over the bowl and then take a dive. All of you are dead. I am alive." Only one person in the big conference room watched, however. Joe stood alone in an otherwise empty room. The others, the entire group of them, had gone. He wondered where they were, and if he would live long enough to find them. It did not seem likely. Chapter 10. Has perspiration odor taken you out of the swim? 10-day Ubik deodorant spray, or Ubik roll-on, ends worry of offending, brings you back where the happening is, safe when used as directed in a conscientious program of body hygiene. The television announcer said, "And now, back to Jim Hunter and the news." On the screen, the sunny, hairless face of the newscaster appeared. Glenn Runsider came back today to the place of his birth, but it was not the kind of return which gladdened anyone's heart. Yesterday, tragedy struck at Runsider Associates, probably the best known of Earth's many prudence organizations. In a terrorist blast at an undisclosed subsurface installation on Luna, Glenn Runsider was mortally wounded and died before his remains could be transferred to Coldpack. Brought to the beloved Brethren Moratorium in Zurich, every effort was made to revive Runsider to half-life, but in vain. In acknowledgment of defeat, these efforts have now ceased, and the body of Glenn Runsider has been returned here to Des Moines, where it will lie in state at the Simple Shepherd Mortuary. The screen showed an old-fashioned white wooden building with various persons roaming about outside. "I wonder who authorized the transfer to Des Moines," Joe Chip said to himself. It was the sad but inexorably dictated decision by the wife of Glenn Runsider, the newscaster's voice continued, which brought about this final chapter which we are now viewing. This is Ella Runsider, herself in Coldpack, whom it had been hoped her husband would join, revived to face this calamity. Mrs. Runsider learned this morning of the fate which had overtaken her husband, and gave the decision to abandon efforts to awaken belated half-life in the man whom she had expected to merge with, a hope disappointed by reality. A still photo of Ella, taken during her lifetime, appeared briefly on the TV screen. "In solemn ritual," the newscaster continued, "grieving employers of Runsider Associates assembled in the chapel of the Simple Shepherd Mortuary, preparing themselves as best they could, under the circumstances, to pay last respects." The screen now showed the roof field of the mortuary. A parked, upended ship opened its hatch, and men and women emerged. A microphone extended by newsmen halted them. "Tell me, sir," a newsmanish voice said, "in addition to working for Glenn Runsider, did you and these other employees also know him personally? Know him not as a boss, but as a man?" Blinking like a light-blinded owl, Don Denny said into the extended microphone, "We all knew Glenn Runsider as a man, as a good individual and citizen whom we could trust. I know I speak for the others when I say this." "Are all of Mr. Runsider's employees, or perhaps I should say former employees, here, Mr. Denny?" "Many of us are here," Don Denny said. "Mr. Len Nigelman, Prudence Society chairman, approached us in New York and informed us that he had heard of Glenn Runsider's death. He informed us that the body of the deceased was being brought here to Des Moines, and he said we ought to come here, and we agreed, so he brought us in his ship. This is his ship." Denny indicated the ship out of which he and the others had stepped. "We appreciated him notifying us of the change of location from the moratorium in Zurich to the mortuary here. Several of us are not here, however, because they weren't at the firm's New York offices. I refer in particular to Inertial's Al Hammond and Wendy Wright, and the firm's field tester, Mr. Chip. The whereabouts of the three of them is unknown to us, but perhaps along with—" "Yes," the news announcer with a microphone said, "perhaps they will see this telecast, which is being beamed by satellite over all of Earth, and will come here to Des Moines for this tragic occasion, as I am sure, and as you undoubtedly are sure, Mr. Runsider and also Mrs. Runsider would want them to. And now, back to Jim Hunter at Newsroom Central." Jim Hunter, reappearing on the screen, said, "Ray Hollis, whose psionically talented personnel are the object of inertial nullification, and hence the target of the prudence organizations, said today, in a statement released by his office, that he regretted the accidental death of Glenn Runsider, and would, if possible, attend the funeral services in Des Moines. It may be, however, that Len Nigelman, representing the Prudence Society, as we told you earlier, will ask that he be barred, in view of the implication on the part of some Prudence organization spokesman that Hollis originally reacted to news of Runsider's death with ill-disguised relief." Newscaster Hunter paused, picked up a sheet of paper, and said, "Turning now to other news." With his foot, Joe Chip tripped the pedal which controlled the TV set. The screen faded, and the sound ebbed into silence. "This doesn't fit in with the graffiti on the bathroom walls," Joe reflected. "Maybe Runsider is dead after all. The TV people think so. Ray Hollis thinks so. So does Len Nigelman. They all consider him dead, and all we have that says otherwise is the two rhymed couplets, which could have been scrawled by anyone, despite what Al thought." The TV screen relit. Much to his surprise, he had not repressed the pedal switch, and in addition it changed channels. Images flitted past, of one thing and then another, until at last the mysterious agency was satisfied. The final image remained, the face of Glenn Runsider. "Tired of lazy taste buds," Runsider said in his familiar gravelly voice. "Has boiled cabbage taken over your world of food? That same old stale, flat, Monday morning odor, no matter how many dimes you put into your stove? Ubik changes all that. Ubik wakes up food flavor, puts hearty taste back where it belongs, and restores fine food smell." On the screen, a brightly colored spray can replaced Glenn Runsider. "One invisible puff-puff whisk of economically priced Ubik banishes compulsive obsessive fears that the entire world is turning into clotted milk, worn-out tape recorders, and obsolete iron cage elevators, plus other, further, as yet unglimpsed manifestations of decay. You see, world deterioration of this regressive type is a normal experience of many half-lifers, especially in the early stages when ties to the real reality are still very strong. A sort of lingering universe is retained as a residual charge experienced as a pseudo-environment, but highly unstable and unsupported by any ergic substructure. This is particularly true when several memory systems are fused, as in the case of you people. But with today's new, more powerful than ever Ubik, all this is changed." Dazed, Joe seated himself, his eyes fixed on the screen. A cartoon fairy zipped airily in spirals, squirting Ubik here and there. A hard-eyed housewife with big teeth and horse's chin replaced the cartoon fairy. In a brassy voice she bellowed, "I came over to Ubik after trying weak, out-of-date reality supports. My pots and pans were turning into heaps of rust. The floors of my connaught were sagging. My husband, Charlie, put his foot right through the bedroom door. But now I use economical, new, powerful, today's Ubik, and with miraculous results. Look at this refrigerator." On the screen appeared an antique turret-top GE refrigerator. "Why, it's devolved back 80 years. 62 years, Joe corrected reflexively. "But now look at it," the housewife continued, squirting the old turret-top with her spray can of Ubik. Sparkles of magic light lit up in a nimbus surrounding the old turret-top, and in a flash, a modern 6-door pay refrigerator replaced it in splendid glory. "Yes," Runsider's dark voice resumed, "by making use of the most advanced techniques of present-day science, the reversion of matter to earlier forms can be reversed, and at a price any connaught owner can afford. Ubik is sold by leading home art stores throughout Earth. Do not take internally. Keep away from open flame. Do not deviate from printed procedural approaches as expressed on label. So look for it, Joe. Don't just sit there. Go out and buy a can of Ubik and spray it all around you night and day." Standing up, Joe said loudly, "You know I'm here. Does that mean you can hear and see me?" "Of course I can't hear you and see you. This commercial message is on videotape. I recorded it 2 weeks ago, specifically 12 days before my death. I knew the bomb blast was coming. I made use of precog talents." "Then you are really dead?" "Of course I'm dead. Didn't you watch the telecast from Des Moines just now? I know you did, because my precog saw that too." "What about the graffiti on the men's room wall?" Runsider, from the audio system of the TV set, boomed, "Another deterioration phenomenon. Go buy a can of Ubik and it'll stop happening to you. All those things will cease." "Al thinks we're dead," Joe said. "Al is deteriorating," Runsider laughed, a deep, re-echoing pulsation that made the conference room vibrate. "Look, Joe, I recorded this goddamn TV commercial to assist you, to guide you, you in particular, because we've always been friends, and I knew you'd be very confused, which is exactly what you are right now, totally confused, which isn't very surprising considering your usual condition. Anyhow, try to hang on. Maybe once you get to Des Moines and see my body lying in state, you'll calm down." "What's this Ubik?" Joe asked. "I think, though, it's too late to help Al," Joe said. "What is Ubik made of? How does it work?" "As a matter of fact, Al probably induced the writing on the men's room wall. You wouldn't have seen it except for him." You really are on videotape, aren't you, Joe said. You can't hear me. It's true. Runsider said, and in addition, Al... Rats, Joe said in weary disgust. It was no use. He gave up. The horse-jawed housewife returned to the TV screen, winding up the commercial. Her voice softer now, she trilled, if the home art store that you patronize doesn't yet carry Ubik, return to your Connapt, Mr. Chip, and you'll find a free sample has arrived by mail, a free introductory sample, Mr. Chip, that will keep you going until you can buy a regular-size can. She then faded out. The TV set became opaque and silent. The process that had turned it on had turned it back off. So I'm supposed to blame Al, Joe thought. The idea did not appeal to him. He sensed the peculiarity of the logic, its perhaps deliberate misdirectedness. Al, the fall guy, Al made into the patsy, everything explained in terms of Al. Senseless, he said to himself. And had Runsider been able to hear him? Had Runsider only pretended to be on videotape? For a time, during the commercial, Runsider had seemed to respond to his questions. Only at the end had Runsider's words become malappropriate. He felt all at once like an ineffectual moth, fluttering at the window pane of reality, dimly seeing it from outside. A new thought struck him, an eerie idea. Suppose Runsider had made the videotape recording under the assumption, based on inaccurate precog information, that the bomb blast would kill him and leave the rest of them alive. The tape had been made honestly, but mistakenly. Runsider had not died. They had died, as the graffiti on the men's room wall had said, and Runsider still lived. Before the bomb blast, he had given instructions for the taped commercial to be played at this time, and the network had so done, Runsider having failed to countermand his original order. That would explain the disparity between what Runsider had said on the tape and what he had written on the bathroom walls. It would, in fact, explain both, which, as far as he could make out, no other explanation would. Unless Runsider was playing a sardonic game with them, trifling with them, first leading them in one direction, then the other, an unnatural and gigantic force haunting their lives, emanating either within the living world or the half-life world, or, he thought suddenly, perhaps both, in any case, controlling what they experienced, or at least a major part of it. Perhaps not the decay, he decided, not that, but why not? Maybe he thought that, too. But Runsider wouldn't admit it. Runsider and Ubik. Ubiquity, he realized all at once. That's the derivation of the made-up word. The name of Runsider's alleged spray can product, which probably did not even exist. It was probably a further hoax to bewilder them that much more. And in addition, if Runsider were alive, then not one, but two Runsiders existed. The genuine one in the real world who was striving to reach them, and the phantasmagoric Runsider who had become a corpse in this half-life world, the body lying in state in Des Moines, Iowa. And, to carry the logic of this out to its full extent, other persons here, such as Ray Hollis and Len Niggleman, were also phantasmagoria, while their authentic counterparts remained in the world of the living. Very confusing, Joe Chip said to himself. He did not like it at all. Granted, it had a satisfying symmetrical quality, but on the other hand, it struck him as untidy. I'll zip over to my Connapt, he decided, pick up the free sample of Ubik, then head for Des Moines. After all, that's what the TV commercial urged me to do. I'll be safer carrying a can of Ubik with me, as the ad pointed out in its own jingly, clever way. One has to pay attention to such admonitions, he realized, if one expects to stay alive, or half alive, whichever it is. The taxi let him off on the roof field of his Connapt building. He descended by moving ramp and arrived at his own door. With a coin that someone had given him, Al or Pat, he could not knowingly remember, he opened the door and entered. The living room smelled faintly of burned grease, an odor he had not come across since childhood. Going into the kitchen, he discovered the reason. His stove had reverted back to an ancient Buck natural gas model with clogged burners and encrusted oven door, which did not close entirely. He gazed at the old, much-used stove dully, then discovered that the other kitchen appliances had undergone similar metamorphoses. The homeopate machine had vanished entirely. The toaster had dissolved sometime during the day and reformed itself as a rubbishy, quaint, non-automatic model. Not even pop-up, he discovered as he poked bleakly at it. The refrigerator that greeted him was an enormous belt-driven model, a relic that had floated into being from God knew what distant past. It was even more obsolete than the turret-top GE shown in the TV commercial. The coffee pot had undergone the least change. As a matter of fact, in one respect it had improved. It lacked the coin slot, operating obviously toll-free. This aspect was true of all the appliances, he realized. All that remained, anyhow. Like the homeopate machine, the garbage disposal unit had entirely vanished. He tried to remember what other appliances he had owned, but already memory had become vague. He gave up and returned to the living room. The TV set had receded back a long way. He found himself confronted by a dark wood cabinet Atwater Kent tuned radio frequency old-time AM radio, complete with antenna and ground wires. God in heaven, he said to himself, appalled. But why hadn't the TV set reverted instead to formless metals and plastics? Those, after all, were its constituents. It had been constructed out of them, not out of an earlier radio. Perhaps this weirdly verified a discarded ancient philosophy, that of Plato's ideal objects, the universals which, in each class, were real. The form TV set had been a template imposed as a successor to other templates, like the procession of frames in a movie sequence. Prior forms, he reflected, must carry on an invisible residual life in every object. The past is latent, is submerged, but still there, capable of rising to the surface once the later imprinting, unfortunately, and against ordinary experience, vanished. The man contains, not the boy, but earlier men, he thought. History began a long time ago. The dehydrated remnants of Wendy, the procession of forms that normally takes place, that procession ceased, and the last form wore off, with nothing subsequent. No newer form, no next stage of what we see as growth to take its place. This must be what we experience as old age. From this absence comes degeneration and senility. Only in this instance it happened abruptly, in a matter of hours. But this old theory, didn't Plato think that something survived the decline, something inner, not able to decay? The ancient dualism, body separated from soul, the body ending as Wendy did, and the soul, out of its nest, the bird flown elsewhere. Maybe so, he thought. To be reborn again, as the Tibetan Book of the Dead says. It really is true. Christ, I hope so, because in that case, we all can meet again, as in Winnie the Pooh, another part of the forest, where a boy and his bear will always be playing, a category, he thought, imperishable. Like all of us, we will all wind up with Pooh in a clearer, more durable new place. For curiosity's sake, he turned on the prehistoric radio set. The yellow celluloid dial glowed. The set gave off a loud 60-cycle hum, and then, amid static and squeals, a station came on. "Time for Pepper Young's Family," the announcer said, and organ music gurgled. "Brought to you by Mild Camay, the soap of beautiful women." Yesterday, Pepper discovered that the labor of months had come to an unexpected end, due to the... Joe shut the radio off at that point. A pre-World War II soap opera, he said to himself, marveling. Well, it followed the logic of the form reversions taking place in this, the dying half-world, or whatever it was. Looking around the living room, he discovered a baroque-legged, glass-topped coffee table on which a copy of Liberty magazine rested, also pre-World War II. The magazine featured a serial entitled Lightning in the Night, a futuristic fantasy supposing an atomic war. He turned the pages numbly, then studied the room as a whole, seeking to identify other changes. The tough, neutral-colored floor had become wide, soft wood boards. In the center of the room, a faded Turkish rug lay, impregnated with years of dust. One single picture remained on the wall, a glass-covered framed print in monochrome showing a dying Indian on horseback. He had never seen it before. It stirred no memories, and he did not care for it one bit. The vid phone had been replaced by a black hook-style upright telephone, pre-dial. He lifted the receiver from the hook and heard a female voice saying, "Number, please." At that, He hung up. The thermostatically controlled heating system had evidently departed. At one end of the living room he perceived a gas heater, complete with large tin flue running up the wall almost to the ceiling. Going into the bedroom, he looked in the closet, rummaged, then assembled an outfit: black Oxfords, wool socks, knickers, blue cotton shirt, camel's hair sports coat, and golf cap. For more formal wear, he laid out on the bed a pinstriped blue-black double-breasted suit, suspenders, wide floral necktie, and white shirt with celluloid collar. "Geez," he said to himself in dismay, as in the closet he came across a golf bag with assorted clubs. What a relic! Once more he returned to the living room. This time he noticed the spot where his polyphonic audio components had formerly been assembled. The multiplex FM tuner, the high hysteresis turntable and weightless tracking arm, speakers, horns, multi-track amplifier, all had vanished. In their place, a tall, tan wooden structure greeted him. He made out the crank handle and did not need to lift the lid to know what his sound system now consisted of. Bamboo needles, a pack of them on the bookcase beside the Victrola, and a 10-inch, 78-speed Black Label Victor record of Ray Noble's orchestra playing Turkish Delight. So much for his tape and LP collection. And by tomorrow, he would probably find himself equipped with a cylinder phonograph, screw-driven, and to play on it, a shouted recitation of the Lord's Prayer. A fresh-looking newspaper lying at the far end of the overstuffed sofa attracted his attention. He picked it up and read the date, Tuesday, September 12, 1939. He scanned the headlines. French claims Siegfried Line dented. Report gains in area near Saarbrücken. Major battle said to be shaping up along Western Front. Interesting, he said to himself. World War II had just begun, and the French thought they were winning it. He read another headline. Polish report claims German forces halted. Say invaders throw new forces into battle without new gains. End of side 3. To continue, turn the cassette over.